The day Margaret Wyndham called the sheriff on me for illegally fishing on her lake was the day she signed her own eviction notice. There I was at dawn, casting my line at the same spot I'd fished for 23 years, when this shrill voice cuts through the morning like nails on a chalkboard. "You're trespassing on HOA waters." Sheriff's deputy shows up looking uncomfortable as hell. "Sorry, Theo, but she filed a complaint. I have to ask you to leave." Margaret stood there in her pastel outfit with that satisfied smirk, watching me pack up my tackle box. The snap of that box closing echoed across the water like a gunshot. What this newcomer didn't know? I didn't just have permission to fish that lake. I owned the entire thing, every drop, and she'd been illegally charging my neighbors $200 a month to use my property. Time to teach a bully that some fishing holes bite back. What would you do if some Karen tried to steal your fishing spot? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I guarantee you've got HOA nightmare stories too. My name's Theo Blackstone, and I moved to Pine Ridge Lake back in 1999 after my wife Sarah passed. Cancer took her at 48, and I needed somewhere quiet to put the pieces back together. This little 2-acre plot came from my grandfather's estate, just raw land with a view of the water. I built the cabin myself, board by board, nail by nail. When your hands are busy, your heart hurts a little less. The lake became my therapy. Every dawn for 23 years, I'd cast my line into that dark water while mist rose like ghosts off the surface. The smell of pine needles mixed with damp earth, and the only sounds were loons calling across the water and the gentle crunch of gravel under my boots at the boat launch. This wasn't just fishing, this was healing. Pine Ridge Lake's a 40-acre natural spring-fed beauty surrounded by a mix of old cabins like mine and newer McMansions that started popping up around 2015. The original residents were good people, blue-collar retirees, veterans, teachers living on modest pensions. We looked out for each other, borrowed tools, shared fish when the catching was good. Nobody cared if your truck had more rust than paint, or if your lawn looked like a patchwork quilt. Then came the gentrification wave, and with it, Margaret Wyndham, who arrived like a hurricane in designer shoes. Margaret rolled into town 6 months ago in a white BMW SUV with a blessed vanity plate, fresh from a divorce settlement that landed her an $800,000 lakefront property. She's 48, with that helmet hair that defies both gravity and good sense, always overdressed like she's heading to a board meeting instead of living next to a fishing hole. Former corporate compliance officer from Atlanta, which explained her talent for turning simple conversations into hostile takeovers. Within 2 weeks, Margaret organized what she called a concerned homeowners meeting. Her pitch? Pine Ridge Lake needed a homeowners association for property values and safety. She had charts, folks. Actual PowerPoint slides about optimizing community assets and managing recreational liability. I haven't seen that much corporate buzzword bingo since my last construction contract meeting. The woman targeted everything that made our little community special. Fishing restrictions, dock permits, landscaping standards that would make Augusta National jealous. But the real kicker? She claimed the lake itself was a common area, requiring monthly membership fees of $200 per household. Margaret collected signatures from 8 of 23 properties, mostly newcomers who bought into her fear-mongering about property values. The rest of us got certified letters demanding mandatory HOA enrollment. I called her up, polite as my mama raised me. "Ma'am, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'm not interested in joining." Her response could have frozen that lake in July. "It's not optional, Mr. Blackstone. This affects everyone's investment." "Ma'am," I said, "I don't have investments. I have a home." The silence stretched longer than a tax audit before she hung up. 2 weeks later, laminated signs appeared around the lake like a bad rash. Private HOA property, members only. The plastic gleamed in the morning sun, an ugly scar across the natural beauty we'd always shared freely. I kept fishing anyway. What else was I going to do? This was my routine, my peace, my connection to Sarah's memory. But Margaret stationed herself at her picture window with binoculars, taking photos like I was some escaped convict instead of a guy trying to catch breakfast. That's when she made the call that lit this whole powder keg. Deputy Charlie Morrison showed up looking like he'd rather wrestle an angry bear. Charlie's local his daddy and mine worked construction together back in the day. "Sorry, Theo," he said, avoiding my eyes. Got a complaint about trespassing. I have to ask you to leave." Margaret stood on her deck in a pink cardigan that probably cost more than my truck payment, arms crossed with that satisfied smirk of someone who thinks they just checkmated a chess grandmaster. I packed up without a fuss, but as that tackle box snapped shut, one thought crystallized like ice on a winter morning. Lady just picked a fight with the wrong fisherman. The next morning, I woke up to find Margaret had filed a formal trespassing complaint with the county. Not just a phone call to Charlie, an actual written complaint with my name on it, complete with photos of me illegally accessing HOA waters. The woman documented my fishing trips like I was running a cartel instead of catching bass. Within 48 hours, she'd organized an emergency HOA meeting about what she called non-compliance issues, the agenda, how to deal with problem residents who refuse to respect community standards. Margaret had recruited Dale Pemberton, a retired bank manager with the personality of wet cardboard, as her HOA treasurer. Dale brought legitimacy to her operation. Nothing says official like a guy who spent 40 years foreclosing on people's dreams. Margaret's next power play hit like a sledgehammer. She identified 4 other problem properties around the lake: Betty Kowalski's cottage with its cheerful garden gnome collection, the Martinez family's weekend cabin with the unapproved fishing boat, old Frank's place with the vegetable garden that apparently violated aesthetic standards, and the Johnsons' modest dock that predated Margaret's arrival by 15 years. We all got violation notices on the same day. The aggressive thwap of Margaret's designer heels clicking across driveways as she personally delivered each letter sounded like a countdown timer to war. Betty's offense? Unapproved garden gnome collection disrupting neighborhood aesthetic standards. I kid you not, the woman was being fined for ceramic lawn decorations that had been there since Carter was president. Betty knocked on my door that evening, her weathered hands trembling like autumn leaves as she held Margaret's legal-sounding letter. The smell of her lavender perfume mixed with genuine fear. "Theo, I don't understand half these words, but they want $50 a day until I remove my gnomes. Those belong to my late husband." That's when I decided to do what any reasonable person does when facing a bully: research the hell out of the situation. The county courthouse sits downtown in a brick building that reeks of old paper, stale coffee, and broken dreams. I spent Tuesday morning in the land records office talking to Joyce Miller, a clerk who's worked there since dinosaurs roamed the earth. Joyce has the patience of a saint and the institutional memory of a steel trap. "Son," she said, squinting at Margaret's HOA filing through glasses thick enough to start fires, "this paperwork's messier than a soup sandwich." She's missing required property descriptions, boundary surveys, and legal authority documentation. That's when Joyce educated me about adverse possession laws. Essentially, you can't claim ownership of property you don't legally control, no matter how many laminated signs you post. Any HOA must legally define its boundaries, and authority and county records always verify their claims before paying a single dime. While I was learning about property law, Margaret escalated to hiring private security. She brought in some kid who looked like he'd rather be wrestling alligators, stationed him at the boat launch during peak fishing hours. The poor guy had the enthusiasm of a wet mop and the authority of a mall cop on vacation. I walked up to him bright and early Wednesday morning, tackle box in hand, boots crunching on frost-covered gravel. "Morning. Mind if I ask what legal authority you have to enforce HOA rules?" The kid shifted like he had fire ants in his uniform. Lady just told me to be visible and take photos of anyone fishing without permission." "Permission from who exactly?" More uncomfortable shifting. "The, HOA?" I smiled and cast my line anyway, the soft plop of my lure hitting water punctuating the awkward silence. "Well, you have yourself a nice day, son. Don't forget to wave for those photos." The security guard lasted exactly 3 days before quitting. Apparently, watching an old man fish while taking creepy surveillance photos wasn't the exciting career opportunity he'd imagined. But Margaret wasn't done. She hired an actual attorney, some shark from the county seat who specialized in HOA enforcement. The cease and desist letter arrived while I was fixing Betty's porch step, because that's what neighbors do for each other around here. The legal language was impressive, full of words like forthwith and pursuant to, demanding $500 in administrative fees, plus immediate compliance with fishing restrictions. Betty read over my shoulder, her face growing paler with each paragraph. "What's so funny?" she asked when I started chuckling. I folded the letter and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Margaret just picked a fight with the wrong fisherman. See, while she was busy playing lawyer and hiring security guards, I'd been doing my homework. That morning's courthouse visit had turned up something interesting on the 1960s county survey maps. A discrepancy suggesting the lake extended way beyond Margaret's claimed HOA territory. More importantly, I'd found a reference to subsurface mineral rights in my grandfather's deed. Time to find out exactly what Grandpa Blackstone had left me, because something told me it was a lot more than Margaret bargained for. Margaret's attorney letter triggered what she called an emergency enforcement meeting at her pristine lakefront palace. Her living room looked like a corporate boardroom had a baby with a country club, all beige leather and motivational artwork about success and excellence. The air reeked of expensive vanilla candles and desperation. She'd assembled her nervous coalition of 8 HOA members, each clutching violation notices like talismans against common sense. "Property values are at stake," Margaret announced, clicking through her PowerPoint presentation like she was launching a hostile takeover instead of harassing retirees. Her enforcement plan included liens, small claims court, and police reports. When Dale suggested maybe they should verify their legal authority first, Margaret steamrolled him faster than a freight train through a paper bag. "We can't show weakness to non-compliant residents," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut diamond. "Give them an inch, they'll take a mile." 2 days later, I woke up to the aggressive buzz of power tools at 7 a.m. sound more jarring than nails on a chalkboard. Margaret was installing a decorative fence across the traditional fishing path to the lake, the same dirt trail that elderly residents like Betty and Frank had used for decades. The fence was white vinyl with little flourishes that screamed, "I spent more on this eyesore than most people make in a month." Margaret stood supervising in a lavender pantsuit, sipping coffee from China that probably cost more than my truck payment. When Frank Martinez showed up for his doctor-ordered morning walk, she pointed to a shiny new sign. "Private HOA property. Authorized members only." "Ma'am," Frank said in his polite old-school way, "I've been walking this path since 1987. Margaret's smile could have frozen hell itself. "Times change, Mr. Martinez." Safety and liability require proper management. That fence was the last straw for a lot of folks. Margaret had just blocked lake access for 3 elderly residents whose daily walks were literally doctor's orders for their heart conditions. But while she was busy playing neighborhood dictator, I was getting educated about something called riparian rights. Back at the courthouse, Joyce Miller pulled out maps and legal books like she was conducting a masterclass in property law. The musty smell of old records mixed with her determination to help. "Theo," she said, adjusting those thick glasses, "riparian rights are trickier than a 3-card Monte game. When you own land adjacent to water, you often get usage rights too, sometimes way more than people realize. Riparian rights mean owning land next to water often includes water usage rights. Look this up if you live near lakes or rivers, because most property owners have no clue what they actually own." Joyce also found something that made her eyebrows climb toward her hairline, a reference to lake bottom mineral rights in my grandfather's 1958 deed. "Son, this language is unusual. Might want to dig deeper into what exactly your grandfather bought from that mining company." While I was learning legal history, Margaret escalated to full-blown harassment. She filed noise complaints about my boat motor, claiming it disturbed the peace at dawn. She called the county health department, alleging my septic system threatened lake quality, forcing me to take time off work for inspections that found absolutely nothing wrong. Then she tried to get my dock declared unpermitted, which was rich considering it predated her birth certificate. But here's where Margaret made her first real mistake. She got greedy and sloppy. I hired surveyor Jake Patterson to map my exact boundaries. $300 well spent. Jake spent half the morning taking measurements and the other half scratching his head like he'd found buried treasure. "Theo," he said, pointing at his equipment, "your lot extends 30 feet further into the lake than anyone expected. Plus, I've seen references to old mining claims from the 1940s around here. Might be worth checking what rights came with those original purchases." That evening, I found an envelope in my mailbox, expensive paper, fountain pen ink that smelled like old money, handwriting that suggested private school education. The note read, "Check the old Thompson Mining Company records at State Archives. Someone in Margaret's own coalition was having second thoughts. Meanwhile, Margaret announced her lake beautification project funded by HOA fees, planning to remove unsafe docks belonging to older residents. She scheduled contractor consultations without permission and referred to the lake as our community asset in her newsletter. Her exact quote, printed in bold, "Some people just don't understand that progress requires sacrifice." But as I studied Jake's survey report that night, listening to loons call across the dark water, one detail jumped out like a lighthouse beacon. Subsurface mineral rights conveyed in perpetuity. Time for a road trip to the state capitol. Because Grandpa Blackstone hadn't just left me a fishing spot, he'd left me the keys to Margaret's worst nightmare. Margaret's confidence hit dangerous levels after successfully intimidating Frank Martinez away from his walking path. She scheduled what she called enforcement action with the sheriff's department for my continued trespassing, complete with official paperwork and a timeline for my arrest. The woman had created an actual fine schedule, $50 per day for unauthorized lake access, payable to the Pine Ridge Lake HOA, which had about as much legal authority as my tackle box. She installed security cameras pointing at fishing spots, their mechanical whirring tracking movement like robotic vultures circling carry-on. The cameras were expensive, the kind banks use to catch actual criminals, not retirees trying to catch breakfast. The red recording lights blinked like angry eyes, watching every cast of my line. Margaret's real masterstroke was organizing a concerned citizens petition to county commissioners. She gathered 47 signatures, mostly from her church group and country club friends who'd never seen Pine Ridge Lake except in her carefully curated Facebook posts about unregulated recreational threats. Her plan? Present the petition at the next public county meeting, complete with PowerPoint slides that would make a corporate consultant weep with pride. She'd already booked a caterer for the post-meeting celebration and invited the local newspaper to document her enforcement success story. While Margaret planned her victory parade, I took a 3-day trip to State Capitol archives. The building reeks of history and bureaucracy dust, old paper, and the crushed dreams of 1,000 researchers. I spent those days digging through Thompson Mining Company records from 1943 to 1962, learning more about my grandfather's business dealings than family reunions ever revealed. Here's what I discovered. Thompson Mining didn't just lease mineral rights. They purchased all mineral and water rights to Pine Ridge Lake for copper exploration. The copper turned out worthless, but those legal rights never rescinded when the company folded. Mineral rights and surface rights can be owned separately. Always check both when buying property near water or former industrial sites, because you might own way more than you think. The paper trail was clearer than spring water. Thompson Mining sold rights to a consolidated holding company in 1965. When that company dissolved in 1978, assets transferred to individual partners. One partner, Theodore Bud Blackstone Sr., my grandfather, rights passed to my father in 1982, then to me in 1999. But here's the kicker that made my coffee taste like victory. Those rights included lake bottom ownership, not just mineral extraction. Every square foot of lake bed, from shore to shore, legally belonged to me. Back home, Margaret was sabotaging everything with the desperation of a sinking ship captain. She reported my boat as an abandoned vessel to state environmental agencies. She filed complaints claiming I was running commercial operations without permits. Apparently, one guy with a fishing rod qualified as commercial fishing in Margaret's alternate universe where logic goes to die. She spread rumors about property tax delinquency, which was hilarious since I'd been current for 23 years. The woman went full scorched earth, approaching my part-time employer to suggest I was unreliable and involved in neighborhood disputes. My boss knew me well enough to laugh off her complaints, but the audacity was breathtaking. Meanwhile, Betty Kowalski was doing detective work that would shame professional investigators. She discovered Margaret's HOA had never filed proper incorporation papers with the state. It existed only as an informal neighborhood group with about as much legal authority as a quilting circle. "Theo," Betty said over morning coffee, steam rising from our mugs while the smell of bacon drifted from her kitchen. "That woman's been running a con game since day one. Dale Pemberton visited me personally, looking more uncomfortable than a vegetarian at a barbecue contest. He suggested a compromise solution, reduced HOA fees in exchange for limited fishing schedule. I politely declined without revealing my research findings. Dale left frustrated, warning that Margaret won't back down easily. If only he knew how spectacularly right he was. Margaret hired a private investigator to excavate my background, desperately hunting for criminal history, tax liens, anything to discredit me. The PI found nothing but reported my financial situation as modest but stable, probably not the smoking gun Margaret was paying for. Her frustration was growing like kudzu in summer heat. The simple intimidation tactics that worked in corporate boardrooms were failing against a guy who just wanted to fish in peace. That's when Margaret decided to go nuclear. She scheduled a final compliance meeting at her house, setting it up like a hostile takeover negotiation with Dale as witness. She invited me to resolve this situation like adults, clearly expecting her boardroom intimidation to finally break me. I agreed to attend, bringing my own folder of documents. As I sat in my truck that evening, the leather seat creaking as I shifted to check my grandfather's original deed one more time, I couldn't suppress a grin. Margaret thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. Tomorrow's meeting was going to be very educational, just not for the person she expected. Attorney Samuel Bennett's office smelled like leather-bound law books and expensive coffee, the kind of place where justice costs money but delivers results. I'd driven to the county seat with my grandfather's deed package, hoping for clarity but half expecting another dead end. Bennett reviewed my documents with the methodical precision of a surgeon, occasionally making notes in handwriting that looked like it required a decoder ring. "Mr. Blackstone," he said after 20 minutes of silence that felt like 20 hours, "this is extraordinary. Your mineral rights don't just include subsurface ownership, they encompass complete lake bottom ownership and all surface water usage rights." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. The leather chair creaked as I leaned forward. "Come again?" Chen spread the documents across his mahogany desk like he was laying out a royal flush. When Thompson Mining purchased these rights in 1943, mining law allowed comprehensive resource acquisition. They bought everything from surface water to bedrock, including what lawyers call perpetual access for extraction and related activities. Modern interpretation? Swimming, boating, fishing all qualify as related activities. The implications hit me like a Category 5 hurricane made of pure justice. So when Margaret's HOA claims lake ownership, they're attempting to charge fees for access to your private property, Bennett finished, his smile sharp enough to perform surgery. Every violation notice, every fine, every restriction, it's all been attempted theft of your property rights. The silence in that office was so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. I didn't just have permission to fish that lake. I owned it. Margaret had been running a protection racket on my property for 6 months. Water rights law is complex, but mineral rights often include more than just mining, especially in older deeds that predate modern property divisions. While I was learning I owned the battlefield, Margaret was distributing final warning letters like a general declaring war on her own troops. Her deadline, 48 hours to pay HOA fees or face immediate enforcement measures. She claimed authority to protect community investment, blissfully unaware she'd been threatening the actual property owner. Chen's paralegal discovered Thompson Mining's 1962 comprehensive lake survey, detailed depth charts, spring locations, fish habitat zones. The brittle yellow maps crackled like Rice Krispies as we unfolded them, revealing environmental data that would make any modern agency jealous. "What are my options?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Immediate cease and desist, trespassing charges, civil lawsuit for harassment." Bennett paused, studying my expression like I was an interesting legal puzzle. "Or we could let Mrs. Wyndham continue digging her own grave until she strikes bedrock." I chose patience. "Let her take the most aggressive action possible." Sometimes the best education comes from natural consequences. Unknown to me, allies were mobilizing, Joyce from the courthouse helping because her grandmother faced similar harassment, county surveyor admitting he'd suspected unusual ownership, Deputy Morrison quietly documenting harassment patterns. Margaret scheduled her county commissioner presentation for Tuesday, complete with PowerPoint about unregulated access destroying property values. She'd booked a caterer, invited the newspaper, and reserved the community center for her victory celebration. Her words to Dale, "After Tuesday, this lake will finally be managed properly." While Margaret planned her coronation, I prepared evidence packets, tax records, photographs of unauthorized structures, harassment timeline. The fresh ink smell from the copy machine mixed with the musty courthouse basement air as I built Margaret's doom in triplicate. The delicious irony? Margaret's research found lake taxes paid by T. Blackstone. She assumed it was a typo, never connecting it to the fishing guy she'd been harassing. Her meeting invitation promised to resolve lake access issues permanently. I accepted, asking if I could bring documentation. Margaret's delight at my apparent surrender was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. The War Council convened at my cabin on Sunday evening. Betty, Joyce, and Attorney Bennett gathered around my kitchen table like generals planning D-Day. Betty brought homemade cookies that smelled like cinnamon and righteous anger. The wood smoke from my fireplace mixed with coffee aroma and the collective determination of people who'd had enough of being pushed around. "All right," Bennett said, spreading legal documents across the table like battle plans. "Let's discuss how to maximize impact of the ownership reveal." Joyce leaned forward, her glasses catching the lamplight. "We need to think about the other families Margaret's been harassing. This isn't just about Theo. It's about establishing that you can't bully people out of their homes." Betty nodded so hard her coffee nearly sloshed over the rim. "That woman fined me $50 a day for garden gnomes. My late husband gave me those gnomes." Chen explained my legal options with the patience of a teacher addressing students who'd been wronged by the system. "We can file criminal trespassing charges against anyone who installed unauthorized structures on Theo's property, civil damages for harassment, defamation, and interference with property enjoyment." He paused, looking at me over his reading glasses. "But I sense you want something more educational than punitive." "I want people to learn from this," I confirmed. "Margaret's not the first HOA bully, won't be the last, but maybe if this goes public enough, others will think twice." Property rights violations can result in both criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Document everything with dates, photos, and witnesses. Joyce pulled out her organizational masterpiece, a chronological evidence file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Every photo, letter, witness statement, and recording organized by date with color-coded tabs. The satisfying click of her three-hole punch had been working overtime. "We've got a parallel timeline," she explained, pointing to her charts. "Margaret's escalating claims on one side, Theo's actual legal rights on the other. The gap between what she claimed and reality is the Grand Canyon of legal liability." Betty coordinated with the other harassed residents, 4 families who'd agreed to attend the county meeting as witnesses. Each had documentation of bogus violations and illegal fee demands. Her kitchen table had become mission control, covered with violation letters, photographs, and handwritten testimonies that told stories of systematic bullying. The media angle came together thanks to Joyce's reporter friend at the county newspaper. Initially skeptical when Joyce pitched newcomer HOA attempts to claim ownership of privately owned lake, the reporter changed her tune after seeing my deed documentation. "This is actually newsworthy," she'd admitted, the smell of newsprint and ambition practically radiating through the phone. "I'll attend the county meeting for potential follow-up." Chen prepared a legal brief explaining riparian rights and mineral rights inheritance in language that wouldn't require a law degree to understand. He created visual aids showing the lake boundary and ownership timeline charts and maps that told the story even a hostile audience couldn't misinterpret. When presenting property disputes, visual documentation is more effective than legal jargon. Make it simple enough for your grandmother to understand. The psychological strategy session was my favorite part. "I want to let Margaret make her presentation first," I explained. "Let her publicly claim lake ownership, explain all her plans, get committed to her position before revealing the truth." Betty looked worried, her weathered hands fidgeting with her coffee cup. "Won't that be humiliating for her? In front of the whole community?" "Natural consequences," I said quietly. "She's been publicly humiliating neighbors for months. Sometimes you have to let bullies face the full weight of their actions." Deputy Morrison had privately shared Margaret's planned enforcement action timeline. She'd scheduled sheriff presence for a trespassing arrest immediately after the county meeting. Margaret expected official backing for her lake access restrictions, complete with handcuffs if necessary. I prepared property deed copies for the sheriff's department just in case they needed documentation that the trespasser was actually the property owner. Our network expanded like ripples on water. The surveyor friend agreed to attend with boundary maps. Township attorney volunteered to review documentation. State Environmental Agency contact stood ready to explain water rights law if needed. Each phone call confirming attendance felt like another nail in Margaret's coffin of lies. Margaret's aggressive marketing of the county meeting was actually helping us. Her social media posts about property rights protection were drawing a larger crowd than usual. She'd invited 3 other HOA presidents from neighboring developments, creating a bigger stage for her own downfall. Chen suggested using the moment for community education beyond just Margaret's comeuppance. He prepared handouts explaining how to research deed history and water rights, plus a resource list including courthouse contacts, surveyor recommendations, and legal aid options. Every property owner should understand their deed. Most never read beyond the basic description and miss critical rights or restrictions. The physical preparations were simple but symbolic. I cleaned and organized my fishing tackle, planning to arrive at the meeting directly from my morning fishing trip. Betty coordinated transportation for elderly residents who wanted to attend but couldn't drive at night. The county tax assessor agreed to attend as a neutral witness, ready to confirm my lake property tax payment history. The assessor also revealed Margaret had never paid taxes on the lake portion of her property because it wasn't actually part of her property. Environmental agency representative was available by phone to explain water law if commissioners needed expert clarification. Margaret's final overreach was beautiful to behold. She distributed victory celebration invitations for after the county meeting, reserved the community center for her lake management success party, and hired a photographer to document what she believed would be her HOA enforcement triumph. Her confidence peaked at exactly the wrong moment, like a general celebrating victory before the battle started. I spent Monday evening retrieving my grandfather's original mining company correspondence from a storage box I hadn't opened in years. The letters showed Thompson Mining's intention to preserve the lake for perpetual family recreation. Grandpa specifically wanted the property for fishing and peaceful retirement. Reading his words, I realized this wasn't just about protecting property rights, it was about honoring family legacy. I checked my watch. County meeting was 18 hours away. Margaret had no idea she was about to face someone who owned not just the fishing spot, but the entire battlefield. Time to go fishing one last time before everything changed. Monday morning, my phone buzzed with Margaret's urgent community safety alert before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. She'd sent a mass text to every lake resident claiming an anonymous tip about tax delinquency on lake property, creating an ownership vacuum. Her argument? The HOA must step in to protect community assets from government seizure. The rapid-fire ding of notifications echoed through the neighborhood as phones lit up with her fear-mongering nonsense. It was like watching someone yell fire in a crowded theater, except the fire was imaginary and the theater was a peaceful lakefront community. Margaret wasn't done with her pre-meeting blitz. She tried to get me banned from the county meeting itself, filing a complaint claiming I'd threatened HOA members. When the commissioner's office politely explained that public meetings are open to all residents, I could practically hear her grinding her teeth through the phone lines. Dale's doubts were growing louder than his loyalty. At Monday's hastily called HOA meeting, he questioned Margaret's increasingly extreme tactics. Shouldn't we get a legal opinion about actual lake ownership before the county meeting? His voice carried the nervous energy of a man realizing he'd backed the wrong horse. Margaret dismissed his concerns like swatting a mosquito. Possession is 9/10 of law, Dale. We have the signs, the fences, the documentation. They have excuses. Dale's uncomfortable expression suggested he was reconsidering every decision that led him to this moment. Margaret's social media campaign escalated to absurd levels. She created a Facebook group called Pine Ridge Lake Property Protection and posted photos of me fishing with captions about unauthorized commercial fishing operations threatening community safety. She shared fake legal citations about HOA authority over common areas that would make any actual lawyer laugh until they cried. The aggressive tapping of her manicured nails on her phone screen must have sounded like a woodpecker on amphetamines. Meanwhile, I maintained my normal routine fishing at dawn, helping neighbors with repairs, staying calm while Margaret spun herself into a frenzy. The contrast wasn't lost on our neighbors. Betty mentioned that people were starting to notice how peaceful I remained while Margaret grew more agitated by the hour. The morning mist rose off the lake like ghosts while Margaret's shrill voice echoed from her deck, barking orders at her remaining supporters like a general losing control of her troops. Margaret's private investigator delivered his final report Monday afternoon. Clean record, modest finances, well regarded by longtime residents. But the PI noted something that should have been a red flag. Subject owns more property than apparent based on visible structures. The report mentioned mineral rights inheritance, but apparently didn't research deep enough. Margaret missed the warning completely, focusing instead on what she called my financial vulnerability. Lady thought I was poor and desperate. She had no idea I was sitting on property rights worth more than her BMW. Her coalition-building efforts brought 3 neighboring HOA presidents to Pine Ridge for a property rights solidarity meeting. Each had similar stories of problem residents resisting HOA authority. They planned a coordinated presentation showing a pattern of non-compliance across multiple communities. Margaret created a false narrative about property values declining due to unmanaged lake access, complete with cherry-picked real estate data that would make a statistician weep. The environmental agency inspection was Margaret's most desperate move. She filed a complaint about my dock threatening the lake ecosystem. When the inspector arrived Tuesday morning, he found a structure that exceeded modern environmental standards. "Mr. Blackstone," he said, examining the commercial-grade construction, "this dock was built to mining equipment specifications. It's probably safer than most modern docks. Original construction permits often exceed modern standards. Save all documentation from previous property owners because that paperwork can be pure gold." Betty's intelligence network delivered crucial information Monday night. Margaret hadn't paid property taxes on the lakefront footage she claimed. The county assessor confirmed Margaret's deed didn't include water rights. It stopped at the high water mark like every other lakefront property. We shared coffee while reviewing Betty's findings, the steam rising between us like visible proof of Margaret's evaporating case. Margaret hired a second attorney Monday afternoon, $2,000, for a legal opinion supporting lake access restrictions. The attorney wrote a beautiful letter based entirely on Margaret's version of facts. The opinion was legally worthless because it assumed the HOA owned the lake, but Margaret waved it around like a papal decree. Anonymous support arrived in my mailbox Tuesday morning. Copies of Margaret's private emails showing coordination with other HOAs to eliminate problem residents through financial pressure techniques and social isolation strategies. Someone in her inner circle was having serious second thoughts and wanted me armed with evidence of systematic harassment. Margaret's media manipulation attempt backfired spectacularly. She contacted the local newspaper claiming a lake safety crisis and provided photos of my unauthorized fishing equipment. The reporter fact-checked her claims and discovered Margaret's background was corporate HR, not environmental science. The reporter's follow-up questions made Margaret defensive enough that she accidentally revealed her real motivation. "People like him lower property values and attract the wrong element." That quote would haunt her. I spent Tuesday afternoon installing official boundary markers at my property line legally required before any confrontation about trespassing. The solid thunk of stakes being driven into earth sounded like drum beats announcing an approaching reckoning. My discreet security cameras captured Margaret's face when she saw the survey markers. Pure panic crossed her features before she regained composure and called Dale for an emergency meeting. The community polarized rapidly. Longtime locals quietly aligned with me while Margaret's support crumbled as her tactics became more extreme. Several HOA members privately contacted me expressing concern about her methods. The nervous shuffling of papers as former allies distanced themselves sounded like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Margaret's point of no return came Tuesday evening. She announced plans to have me arrested at the county meeting for criminal trespassing, coordinated with a private security company for citizens' arrest backup if the sheriff refused to act, and confirmed her celebration venue booking and photographer for HOA victory documentation. Her exact words to her remaining supporters: "After tomorrow night, we'll never have to deal with his type again." I spent that final evening on my porch, listening to loons call across the water, reviewing my evidence one last time. Margaret was about to learn that some fishing holes bite back harder than she ever imagined. Wednesday morning arrived with perfect irony. I followed my normal routine, casting my line into the dawn mist at the exact spot Margaret claimed as HOA waters. The lake was glass smooth, reflecting pink and orange sunrise colors like a postcard from a world where bullies didn't exist. Margaret watched from her window with binoculars, phone already pressed to her ear. Within 10 minutes, Deputy Morrison's cruiser rolled up the gravel path, the crunch of tires breaking the morning peace like an unwelcome alarm clock. "Theo," Charlie said, stepping out with the enthusiasm of a man walking to his own execution. She filed another complaint. "I have to ask you to leave until tonight's meeting resolves this." I complied gracefully, loading my tackle box with the same careful movements I'd made for 23 years. Margaret stood on her deck in a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, arms crossed in triumph, watching me pack up like she'd just conquered Mount Everest in high heels. The confident click of her designer shoes echoed across the water as she walked back inside, probably to rehearse her victory speech one more time. Margaret spent the day coordinating her coalition like a general preparing for Normandy. She arrived at the county building 2 hours early with 3 neighboring HOA presidents, all wearing matching navy blazers like they were starting a cult. Her entourage carried matching binders, poster boards, and enough documentation to wallpaper a small house. She reserved front-row seats for her supporters, distributed talking points about safety and property values, and tested her PowerPoint presentation 3 times to ensure technical perfection. The photographer she had hired set up equipment like he was covering a royal wedding instead of a county meeting about fishing rights. Dale expressed final concerns about legal authority, his voice cracking with the desperation of a man who'd realized too late he was on the wrong side of history. Margaret dismissed him with a wave that would make a Roman emperor proud. "Dale, we've come too far to show weakness now." I arrived at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the meeting, directly from my unsuccessful morning fishing trip. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. I carried my tackle box in a single manila folder, looking like I'd wandered in from the lake by accident. My worn flannel and work boots contrasted sharply with Margaret's perfect styling and her supporters' corporate uniforms. Betty, Joyce, and the other longtime residents scattered throughout the room like seasoned guerrillas preparing for asymmetric warfare. We didn't sit together, didn't coordinate obviously, just occupied space and waited. The room dynamics were fascinating. County commissioners at the front recognizing familiar faces among the newcomers. Margaret's supporters clustered in their matching blazers, chattering nervously like actors before a performance. The county newspaper reporter sat in the back with her photographer, notepad ready. The air smelled like floor polish, nervous sweat, and impending justice. Commissioner Williams called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. sharp. After routine business about road maintenance and budget approvals, he announced, "Next item, public comment regarding Pine Ridge Lake access and homeowner association concerns. Ms. Wyndham, you have the floor." Margaret practically levitated to the podium, her professional PowerPoint gleaming on the projection screen like a corporate presentation from hell. She'd created graphs, charts, and statistics that would make a marketing team proud. "Commissioners, concerned residents," she began, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "I'm here tonight, representing the Pine Ridge Lake Homeowners Association to address a critical community safety issue." Her presentation was polished, too polished. Professional photos of my fishing gear labeled as unauthorized commercial equipment. Charts showing declining property values attributed to unregulated lake access. Quotes from her petition about community safety concerns and liability risks. She presented her 47 signatures like they were the Declaration of Independence, claimed the HOA represented the responsible majority of homeowners, and showed photos of me with my tackle box labeled as repeated trespassing incidents. "We're not trying to prevent recreation," Margaret said, her tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "We're simply requesting official support for reasonable access restrictions and safety standards. The HOA has taken responsibility for lake management because no clear private ownership exists." That last line hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Margaret's closing was pure corporate manipulation. "We must protect our community investment from those who don't respect progress and property values. I'm formally requesting that commissioners grant the Pine Ridge Lake HOA Enforcement Authority over lake access, support our citation program for trespassing violations, and officially recognize our organization as the managing body for this community asset." Her supporters applauded. The photographer captured Margaret's satisfied smile. Dale looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Commissioner Williams cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the applause like a judge's gavel. "Thank you, Miss Wyndham. That was very thorough." He paused, scanning the room. "Are there any responses or alternative perspectives?" I raised my hand slowly, deliberately, like a student who'd been waiting for exactly this question. Margaret's confident smirk suggested she expected surrender or fumbling excuses. Her body language screamed victory, shoulders back, chin up, arms crossed in satisfaction. Commissioner Rodriguez nodded. "Mr. Blackstone, please approach." I walked to the podium carrying only my manila folder, the thud of my work boots on the floor sounding like the countdown to Margaret's worst nightmare. The room fell silent enough to hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Margaret leaned back in her front row seat, clearly expecting me to beg for mercy or negotiate terms of surrender. Instead, I opened my folder with the casual deliberation of someone holding a royal flush and said 7 words that drained the color from Margaret's face. "Commissioners, I'd like to clarify property ownership." I started with gratitude because that's how you hook an audience before dropping a bomb. "Thank you, Commissioners, for your time and for allowing democratic process to work as intended. I also want to thank Ms. Wyndham for her passionate presentation about community management." Margaret's smirk widened. She thought I was surrendering. "I agree that lake management is an important responsibility," I continued, my voice steady as bedrock. "Which is why I take my property tax payments seriously. Been paying them faithfully for 23 years on Pine Ridge Lake." The room's energy shifted like a weather front moving in. Papers rustled as I opened my folder with deliberate slowness, the sound echoing in the suddenly attentive silence. Ms. Wyndham stated that no clear private ownership exists for the lake. I'd like to correct that misunderstanding. I produced a certified copy of my property deed, the official county seal visible even from the back row. This deed, dating from 1958, establishes that my grandfather, Theodore Blackstone Sr., purchased complete mineral and water rights to Pine Ridge Lake from Thompson Mining Company. Margaret's face transitioned from smug to confused faster than a traffic light change. "Those rights," I continued, "include subsurface ownership of the entire lake bottom and perpetual water access rights for extraction and related activities. In modern legal interpretation, fishing, swimming, and boating all qualify as related activities." I placed the deed on the commissioner's desk like a lawyer presenting Exhibit A in a murder trial. Commissioner Williams leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Mr. Blackstone, are you claiming you own the lake?" "Not claiming, sir. Stating fact. I own the lake bottom, the water rights, and have been paying property taxes on it annually since inheriting the property in 1999. The room erupted in whispers like a kicked hornet's nest. Margaret shot to her feet, her cream blazer suddenly looking less authoritative and more like a costume from a play that had gone horribly wrong. "This is impossible." Her voice cracked with panic that no amount of corporate polish could hide. "We researched ownership. This can't be legal." Attorney Bennett stood from where he'd been sitting quietly in the middle rows. "If I may, Commissioners?" Samuel Bennett, representing Mr. Blackstone. "I can clarify the property law here." Commissioner Rodriguez gestured for him to continue, clearly fascinated by the drama unfolding better than any reality TV show. Chen approached with the calm authority of someone who'd read every relevant law book twice. "Riparian rights and mineral rights inheritance are complex, but this case is actually straightforward. Thompson Mining Company purchased comprehensive resource rights in 1943, which were never rescinded. Those rights passed through legitimate inheritance to Mr. Blackstone. He produced his own documentation, the chain of ownership from Thompson Mining to the holding company to my grandfather to me, each transfer properly recorded and notarized. More specifically," Bennett added, "the HOA Ms. Wyndham represents has been collecting fees for access to Mr. Blackstone's private property. Every violation notice, every fine, every restriction has been an attempted interference with his legal property rights." Margaret's face had gone from cream to white to a shade of red that suggested either rage or a medical emergency. "You can't just claim ownership of an entire lake. What about our investments, our property values?" Commissioner Williams held up a hand for silence. "Ms. Wyndham, please hold your comments. Mr. Bennett, do you have verification of Mr. Blackstone's tax payments?" Joyce stood up from her seat, bless her organized soul. "Commissioner, I'm Joyce Miller from the County Land Records Office. I can confirm Mr. Blackstone has been paying lake property taxes annually since 1999. I can also confirm that Ms. Wyndham's HOA has never filed proper incorporation papers with the state, meaning they have no legal authority to collect fees or impose restrictions." The county tax assessor, sitting near the back, added his voice. I can verify Mr. Blackstone's tax payment history. I can also confirm that Ms. Wyndham has never paid property taxes on any lake footage because her deed terminates at the high water mark like every other waterfront property. Margaret looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her expensive shoes. Her supporters began whispering urgently among themselves, the sound of loyalty evaporating faster than morning dew in August. Dale officially resigned as HOA treasurer right there in his seat, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm out. This is not what I signed up for." Commissioner Williams requested a brief recess to review documentation. During those 10 minutes, Margaret stood frozen at the front of the room while her photographer quietly packed up his equipment and her supporters executed the fastest political retreat since Napoleon left Moscow. Betty approached me with tears in her eyes. "Theo, does this mean she can't find me for my gnomes?" "Betty," I said with a smile, "it means she never had the authority to fine anyone for anything." When the commissioners returned, Williams delivered his findings with the weight of official judgment. After reviewing the documentation, we confirm Mr. Blackstone's property ownership is legally valid and comprehensive. The Pine Ridge Lake Homeowners Association has no authority to collect fees, impose fines, or restrict access to private property. Furthermore, any structures installed by the HOA on Mr. Blackstone's property constitute trespassing and must be removed immediately. Sheriff Martinez, who'd been standing in the back waiting for Margaret's requested trespassing arrest, approached the commissioners with a bemused expression. "Just to clarify, I'm supposed to arrest Mr. Blackstone for trespassing on his own property?" The room burst into laughter that sounded like justice being served with a side of poetic irony. Margaret grabbed her purse and rushed toward the exit, her high heels clicking frantically against the floor like a drumbeat of defeat. The celebration she'd planned, the photographer she'd hired, the victory party she'd booked, all waiting for a victor who'd just become the defeated. A reporter caught her at the door. "Ms. Wyndham, would you like to comment on—" "No comment!" She practically screamed it, shoving past into the parking lot where her BMW waited like a getaway car. I stayed to answer questions, because that's what you do when you win with grace instead of arrogance. 1 week after the county meeting, I woke up to something I hadn't experienced in 6 months. Complete silence. No security cameras whirring, no Margaret's shrill voice echoing across the water, just the peaceful morning sounds of loons calling and gentle waves lapping against my dock. The county had ordered removal of all unauthorized signs, fences, and structures from my property within 72 hours. Margaret's decorative fence that blocked the fishing path, gone by Thursday morning. The security cameras, dismantled by Friday afternoon. The laminated private HOA property signs disappeared faster than free beer at a construction site. I resumed my dawn fishing routine without harassment. The morning mist rose off the dark water like it always had, and the smell of pine needles mixed with damp earth reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this place 23 years ago. The crunch of gravel under my boots at the boat launch sounded like a victory march I never asked for, but thoroughly earned. 3 families formally withdrew from Margaret's HOA within days. Without Dale as treasurer, and with her legal authority exposed as fiction, the organization effectively dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. The remaining members quietly stopped paying fees and removed their HOA stickers from their mailboxes. Betty organized a community workday the following Saturday to repair damage from Margaret's improvements. 23 neighbors showed up, including several who'd initially supported the HOA before seeing Margaret's true colors. We pulled fence posts, filled holes, and restored the fishing path to its natural state. Former HOA members brought tools and apologies. One couple brought homemade barbecue that smelled like redemption and tasted like community healing. The satisfying thunk of fence posts being pulled from earth sounded like liberation. Margaret listed her lakefront property for sale within 2 weeks. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. She was gone by the following Monday. Her BMW disappeared from the neighborhood, and with it, the toxic energy that had infected our peaceful community. The house sold below market value after 45 days, apparently. A reputation for harassing neighbors doesn't help property values. The new owners, the Patterson family, specifically chose the location for fishing access and quiet community. Their kids were out on the dock with fishing rods their first weekend, laughing and splashing in water that belonged to everyone who approached it with respect. Joyce organized a Know Your Property Rights workshop at the library that drew 73 attendees from 3 counties. Attorney Bennett volunteered his time for free legal education sessions, teaching people how to research deeds, verify HOA authority, and protect themselves from similar harassment. Most property disputes stem from ignorance. Education prevents expensive legal battles and years of harassment. I created an informal lake access agreement for all neighbors. No fees, no complicated rules, just basic respect. My only requirements: respect fishing hours, don't litter, don't harass others. I installed a tasteful wooden sign at the boat launch. Blackstone Family Lake, all welcome, fish responsibly. Several neighbors offered to pay me for lake access. I refused every offer. This wasn't about money, it was about community. The story spread through regional property owner networks faster than gossip at a church picnic. 2 other aggressive HOAs faced challenges from newly educated residents who'd learned to verify claims before paying fees. County commissioners reviewed HOA formation requirements, adding stricter documentation standards to prevent future Margarets. Betty's garden gnome collection returned to full glory, expanded with 3 new additions that neighbors contributed, including one gnome holding a fishing rod that made me laugh every time I saw it. She organized a Gnome Sweet Gnome garden tour that became an annual tradition. I proposed an annual lake cleanup and fish habitat improvement program, partnering with state environmental agencies for professional guidance. We created a memorial fund honoring Grandpa Blackstone's conservation vision, awarding 3 scholarships annually for local students studying environmental science. Private property ownership can benefit entire communities when managed thoughtfully. It's not about control, it's about stewardship. The annual Pine Ridge Lake Days Festival launched that summer, celebrating community, conservation, and the kind of neighborly respect Margaret never understood. Kids competed in fishing contests. Adults shared stories over barbecue. Everyone remembered why small communities matter. My morning fishing routine became a group meditation. Several neighbors joined me for quiet dawn companionship. We didn't always talk much, just shared coffee and the peaceful ritual of casting lines into water that reflected the kind of community we'd fought to preserve. My back pain improved with reduced stress and supportive neighbors. Turns out, constant harassment takes a physical toll you don't notice until it stops. Betty's cousin mentioned facing similar HOA problems with a community garden involving city council corruption and illegal land seizure attempts. I smiled quietly, sipping my coffee, watching sunrise paint the lake in colors that never get old. Some folks never learn that bullies eventually meet their match, I told her. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about teaching lessons that ripple outward, protecting people you'll never meet from tyrants they haven't encountered yet. Now, drop a comment with your worst HOA nightmare. I read every one, and your story might be next. Hit subscribe if you believe property rights matter, and ring that notification bell because justice stories drop every Tuesday. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching a bully realize they picked a fight with someone who owns the entire battlefield.
That's all for today's HOA madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts down below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.